I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Today, we're going to review The Knife's 4th album, which just came out, entitled Shaking the Habitual!
I didn't realize I was the habitual in this
situation. Well, I guess you are.
Okay.
Shaking the Habitual, kind of a different album for The Knife. The Knife are a Swedish duo, brother-sister duo, that make kind of very progressive electronic music is what I would say. It's very beat-based. You know, I know their 2006 album, Silent Shout, this was the first album since 2006. Silent Shout was a huge success, and it was the first one that these two actually went on tour with. And, you know, a lot of mystique surrounding this duo. You know, they rarely make public appearances. They don't show up for all the award shows because they win a lot of awards. You know, they wear these, you know,
crazy masks.
The crazy doctor mask from the carnival in medieval time, or not medieval, but Renaissance times. You know, just a really cool kind of story. You know, a lot of out there lyrics, lyrics that involve gender equality. You know, just this is a political statement. They're very forward about the fact that they want their music to be, you know, cutting edge and to be a political statement. So Shaking the Habitual definitely fits that mold, and this actually departs from what the band has done in the past. For whatever degree of mood, it was always kind of more pop structured and pop based.
Yeah, very much so. Looking back to Deep Cuts, which is probably my favorite album of theirs, actually. I really like Silent Shout as well, and Self-Titled's pretty good, but Deep Cuts was also the first exposure I had to this group, and I just loved how you know, there's this kind of Bjork-esque vocalist with a really heavy synth-based electronic beats. It was the kind of electronic music that I really liked because it had this kind of creepy, eerie edge to it that was really alluring to me. And they definitely carry that on in Shaking the Habitual, but as the title of the album would imply, they even stray farther from those pop structures into something that, well, not only the structures of the songs are nowhere close to pop, but this is hardly even your typical electronica anymore. They're not only using electronic elements, they're using a lot of what sounds like samples and just very distorted, overblown, what I would think are maybe like horns or bowed instruments or even just like industrial sounds.
Right, and it's almost like they designed the sound to get at you, to be aggressive, to just kind of get at your senses and really shake you. And that's why I really kind of got into the album title and the album cover, and I think, you know, it goes. It's kind of important to point out at this point, this is a double album. This album is darn near 100 minutes long. And that's kind of something that's pretty unusual for an electronic artist, and especially in this genre. You don't see a lot of double albums, so it kind of is setting the stage for that, and I know it's getting a lot of press because of that. There is a lot of really solid material on this album, but simply because this album is so long. A lot of long track lengths, like there's a 20-minute ambient track on this album, kind of at the end of where disc 1 would end, with track 7, Old Dreams Waiting to be Realized. You know, it's a 19-minute track, but a lot of just what I would say, you know, my favorite tracks, the opening track is 6 minutes long. Full of Fire is, you know, my favorite track on this album, and that's 9 minutes long. And, you know, so a lot of, they're not scared to really stretch out these compositions and let them kind of unfold and build throughout, and then then incorporate new changes. So it's a much more progressive, really breaks away from those typical, more pop structured song elements. Now, the second half of this album is, I would say, you know, you have the 20-minute break at the end. If you're listening to this back to back, we have to nail it down to brass tacks here. It interrupts the listening experience. And I don't know, you know, some people, when you listen to music, you may not analyze it like Tom and I do. Tom and I are definitely unique in that, in the fact that we are strictly looking at an album listen. We have said this time and time again. We don't review bands, we don't review artists, we don't review genres, we review albums and albums alone. And those albums compared to the other albums that we've reviewed in you know, recent history, other albums in the genre or other albums even in other genres. And so I think that, you know, our unique style, and Tom, you know, jump in here whenever you want. You know, I think we have a very unique style as far as how we approach reviewing albums. And The Knife kind of shook the foundation of, and made us kind of really analyze, like, what do we do that other reviewers aren't doing? And not to say that we're better. I mean, we'll let you decide that. I mean, I just think that we're approaching it differently.
Exactly. It's a completely different way of looking at it. And the first kind of comparison I'd like to make in that, well, first off, us, well, you know, to me, everyone's a critic. I really think.
Right, absolutely.
Just because
that's the whole premise of what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Just because we get in front of a camera and talk about our opinions and put them out there as a basis for discussion doesn't mean we think our opinions are any better than anyone else's. It's just what we do.
Right.
So the first thing I'd like to do is kind of compare us as listeners to other listeners.
Right.
I've been reading a lot about what people are saying about this album because I think it's important to understand that context. Just because I feel like you and I are kind of in the minority in the way that we're approaching this. And one thing that we've seen a lot of people make comments about is that there's a lot of good material here, but they'll probably just pare it down to, you know, maybe one album's worth and cut out the tracks they don't like, and then they really like it. Well, I gotta tell you, if you're doing that, then you didn't like this album.
Right.
You can't say, oh yeah, this 96-minute album, well, I really liked 50 minutes of it, so I'm just gonna cut out the rest that I don't like and call it a good album.
Yeah.
No, then you aren't taking what the artist has created as their artistic statement and judging it for what it is. You're just taking the best of what you find. You know, it's in the same way that you can't judge an entire artist's body of work really on their greatest hits.
Right.
You can't judge an album on what you would consider its highlights. That's not really fair. Second, kind of comparing us to the other critical viewpoints out there. One thing that I noticed recently, I came across while I was browsing through allmusic.com, which is a website that Jake and I both really like. It's a terrific resource. I've been going there for years, since before we started Velocities in Music. And one thing that I came across recently is they have an explanation of their rating scale, and they point out that they actually just compare albums based on that artist's body of work alone. So, for example, they would be comparing Shaking the Habitual only to the Knives' 3 previous albums, which is an interesting way of doing things. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying for us it doesn't really make sense, because then 4 stars for one band doesn't really isn't the same thing as 4 stars for another band.
It's not relatable for you guys. It's not relatable. I mean, like, when we give you a score, we want you to be able to take that and go, oh, this is where Jake and Tom went with that. That's consistent with every other music review, all 595 reviews or 591 reviews we've done at this point. You know, it's consistent with amongst all of those reviews. And it's just, when the fact of the matter is, if you're only looking at the artist's previous albums, you know, you don't have that basis of comparison. So I think for us, I mean, you know, we definitely like to comment on where the band's gone, how it plays with the genre, but we're really comparing this to everything else that's coming out right now, and we're focusing on the quality of the listening experience from the moment you press play on Shaking the Habitual to the second that you turn it off where the album ends. And if you can really, really sit through all 40 minutes of that ambient music, and especially the 19-minute ambient track, or to me, the worst offender is the almost 10-minute track 5 on disc 2, fracking fluid injection.
I hate that song.
I mean,
I can't stand it.
It's really,
it's tough.
And I think most people will agree. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there that really like that sound. That's more into the ambient stuff. I mean, from an artistic perspective, it's actually kind of cool what they do. It's just from a listener standpoint, how the song fits on the album. It's kind of a struggle to get through, especially 10 minutes of it. Now, I think when you compare Shaking the Habitual to other double albums that have come out recently, such as, I know these are different genres, but just bear with us here. This Swans, The Seer, and then also Baroness, Yellow and Green. Two double albums that we reviewed in 2012 that we actually loved. We loved both those albums. And specifically, Tom, you know, I'll let you speak to Swans, but one thing that, you know, I was really impressed me about Yellow and Green was the fact that both sides of the album, there was clear definition on both sides of the double album, but every single track added value to the album. Every single track stood on its own, and you could put the two sides of the album stood together, stood alone as single listening experiences, and when you combine them, they were crafted to make one unique listening experience that worked well from beginning to end. And I just don't feel like The Knife does that. I mean, I would consider tracks 1 through 6 to be one single listening experience. I really like those first, I mean, track 6 is a very short track, so tracks 1 through 5, and then Raging Lung on the back end, and then I really like the closer on the second half, Ready to Lose. And I feel like that's the bulk of the good material on this album.
And you also mentioned The Seer. And The Seer was even longer than this by like 20 minutes or so, but the thing about The Seer is that those long drawn out portions, I feel like they still contributed to that album as a whole. The album was so unified, and the problem here is that with Old Dreams Waiting to be Realized, I feel like it just drops into this ambient track that actually interrupts the flow. Instead of supporting the entire album as one unit, it's like this huge tangent, this big detour that then is not only hard to get on board with at first because you've had this like assault of the first 6 tracks,
which is actually really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Up into that point.
But then it's also difficult to come out of going into Raging Lung and Networking. I just feel like it has no place here. Now, I actually like the idea of it as a standalone track. If it was shorter, I like a lot of the ideas there. I like a lot of the ambient sounds. I just don't think it works here in context. And then also, the other 2 big offenders for me were, you mentioned fracking fluid injection, and also for me the track before it, Stay Out Here, which I hate that song. Hate it. Yeah, I can't stand it.
It's almost 11 minutes long.
Yeah, so right there, those 3 tracks really bother me. It's really only those 3 tracks. I have a lot of good things to say about the rest of the album. I love the sounds that they're using. I love the beats.
The beats are one of my highlights of this album. I mean, I have rarely ever heard beats this complex that really just add such an intensity to the electronic music. I mean, I really feel like that's the edge that the knife has.
Yeah, and they're also pulling from a lot of influences that I really like. I hear a lot of Kate Bush, Peter Gabriel, Bjork, stuff like that, artists that I really like, but they're taking it and making it edgy and progressive, and I love that. But the reality of it is, you've got a 19-minute track, an almost 11-minute track, and an almost 10-minute track that I just don't care for. And when you put that all together, you've got, what, about 40 minutes worth of music that I just don't really like. So when I'm thinking about it, you got a 96-minute album, 40 minutes of it I'm just kind of on, but the rest of it I love. I mean, if you took that out, I still think it would flow. I would like the ideas a lot more, but I have to be realistic and give those tracks their proper weight.
And I feel like the Knife really weren't paying attention, or they just simply didn't care of how this was going to feel as an album experience. I mean, you know, if you were to listen to this straight through, there's going to be moments that you like and moments that you don't, but there doesn't seem to be any logic or, you know, divine intervention as to why you would have certain tracks follow other tracks. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any good reason for the certain album setup that they have. The album structure seems out of place. To me, what would make more sense is to actually make a full disc 1 that is a solid album, and then disc 2 that's more of a B-sides album, kind of like what Radiohead did with Kid A and Amnesiac. Even though I would say that those both are stronger than this as a whole. So, I mean, I just feel like they just kind of missed the boat on this. And while there's a ton of really great, intriguing music on here, and very artistic statements that I get behind, especially in the lyrics, I really can't get into this album to the point that I can say that I like it. I mean, I definitely like parts of it, but we grade albums. We review albums for you. So, I guess the takeaway that I would recommend, and tell me if you agree here, Tom, is that you guys listen to this album for your own. Ignore, I mean, we have a very complicated scoring system, which we've explained to you guys a lot, but the score is not really what we're trying to portray to you. What we really care about is what your guys' opinions and thoughts in the words that you came up with to describe Shaking the Habitual in other albums that you're into. And so I feel like that's the most important thing, is conveying the ideas of what Shaking the Habitual was all about, which it pretty much is a legendary landmark album that's going to go down as one of the best of 2013. However, as far as albums are concerned, I don't feel like it's the best listening experience, and so I'm going to grade it accordingly, and I'm going 59 on this one.
I'm going 66.
Yeah, you like this a little bit better than I?
Well, it's just, I know that there were parts that bothered you more than me.
The second half seemed to fall off a lot more for me. Like, even Raging Lung, which I know a lot of people like that track, but to me it was a clear step down from most of the songs on the first part of the album. Plus, I wasn't big on Networking, although I did like the beats of that song.
Yeah, and if I had to grade this based on the good parts, if I took out the stuff I didn't like, I'd give this like mid-80s.
Yeah.
I love some of the stuff on here, but, you know, that's only like 2/3 of the album.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it's really not fair to the artist to say, oh, well, we're only going to love like 5 of their, 11 tracks that or 13 tracks that you put on the album. You know, that's not really fair to the artist or yourself as a music listener, because the way I look at it is every time you have to press skip on a track, that's a knock against the album. I mean, it's just what it is. The album is the whole purpose of having an album is so that you have a straight-through listening experience, and that the length of the album is justified. I mean, that's kind of the point of what presenting it in an album. Otherwise, artists would just release singles. Right. Yeah. And the Knife surely could do this here. And if that's the future of music, that's fine. However, for the time being, the album is the specified format that's been in use for like 5 decades now or more. And that's what we're here to grade and understand, and the unit of music that we're sitting here trying to review. what did you guys think of Shaking the Habitual? Now, I know that this is kind of a low score in comparison to all the buzz that's going around about Shaking the Habitual. So if you guys, really love this album, absolutely leave us a comment and let us know, your thoughts and why. Like we said, I think both Tom and I think favorably of this album. It's just from a listening experience standpoint, it doesn't measure up to our the standards we've kind of set for what a good listening experience is. Please leave us a comment at www.youtube or velocitiesofmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesofmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums from 2013 you've been into and would like to see us review. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
Ready to lose the